Everybody knows the Colosseum. And everyone knows that this part of the Colosseum looks a lot better than this part. So what happened? How and why did half of the greatest Roman amphitheater vanish? That sounds like a job for questions about ancient Greece and Rome you were afraid to ask in school. As usual, I'm Dr. Garrett Ryan, and today I'll be talking about the history of the Colosseum during the Middle Ages and Renaissance. For almost 500 years, the Colosseum was the Roman Empire's most impressive arena. Emperor after emperor sponsored spectacles to astonish and delight the Roman people. Exotic animals from the farthest reaches of the known world were hunted with gilded spears. Criminals were devoured by bears in elaborate mythological charades. The empire's greatest gladiators dueled on blood-stained sands, and so on. Over its half-millennium of use, the Colosseum underwent a long series of renovations. The most important took place in the early 3rd century, when a fire destroyed the entire upper deck of seating. It took the emperors 5 years to restore the building, and signs of hasty repairs are still visible all along the north wall. Later, a series of earthquakes caused serious damage that was never fully repaired. The spectacles held in the Colosseum also changed over the centuries. The most impressive games, unsurprisingly, were held during the empire's heyday. To celebrate his victory in Dacia, for example, Trajan celebrated a whopping 123 days of games, in the course of which 5,000 pairs of gladiators fought, and 11,000 animals were killed. From the mid-3rd century onward, however, the quality of the games started to slip. The later emperors were poorer and more distracted than their predecessors, and tended to spend most of their time and money far from the city of Rome. It also didn't help that most of the more exciting animals had been hunted to the point of scarcity, and that the price of gladiators was always rising. Eventually, the gladiatorial combats stopped altogether. According to later legend, a monk leapt down to the arena and tried to stop a gladiator from killing his opponent. The enraged spectators then stoned the monk to death. On learning of this, the emperors ended the combats. Or so the legend goes. Reality was probably less dramatic. Although Christian disapproval was one cause of the decline in combats, the fact that the emperors were no longer paying for them seems to have been equally important. Whatever the reason, the last gladiators fought in the Colosseum sometime in the early 5th century. The beast hunts, however, continued. They lasted longer, in fact, than the Western Roman Empire itself. The last hunts were sponsored by the barbarian kings who succeeded the emperors. These kings, however, had little interest in the games, not least because it was difficult to justify staging them for Rome's steadily shrinking population. The final recorded hunts in the Colosseum were held in the year 523. Within a few centuries, all understanding of the Colosseum's function was lost. Some claimed the Colosseum had been a temple of the sun, and had originally been crowned by a vast golden dome. Others thought it had been a temple dedicated to all the gods, and that a gigantic statue of Jupiter had originally stood in the arena. The strangest legends revolved around the Roman poet Virgil, whom medieval legend transformed into a great magician. Virgil, it was said, had built the Colosseum with the help of his demons, and used it as a theater for necromancy. Part of the confusion derived from the fact that the Colosseum was already half ruined at the beginning of the Middle Ages, and fell apart steadily over the next millennium. Earthquakes were the main natural cause. Like any tall masonry structure, the Colosseum was susceptible to seismic damage, and, thanks to a quirk of geology, part of the building was especially vulnerable. The Colosseum's massive concrete foundations only go down to bedrock on the north side. On the south side of the building, the foundation rests on waterlogged sediment. This unstable subsoil amplified seismic shocks, and gradually brought about the collapse of half the building. The Colosseum's greatest enemies, however, were the Romans themselves. The building's walls were fashioned from a fine limestone called travertine, and its seats were made of marble. Both stones were attractive to builders. Marble and travertine are not only easy to reuse, they can also both be burnt in kilns to make lime for mortar. Pillaging of the Colosseum stone began even before the final games were staged in the arena, and continued on a vast scale for more than 1,000 years. But the Colosseum wasn't just a quarry. For much of the Middle Ages, hundreds of people lived in the ruinous vaults and passageways. There were houses, complete with courtyards and gardens. There were shops with wooden awnings and storage lofts. There were stables, there were churches, and at one point there was even a full-blown fortified palace. Remarkably, many of the medieval Colosseum's inhabitants were lime burners, who spent their days tearing apart the very building in which they were squatting. Thanks largely to their efforts, the Colosseum became an increasingly inhospitable place to live. Finally, in 1349, an earthquake brought down the entire south half of the Colosseum's circuit wall, forming a colossal pile of rubble. Over the next 4 centuries, this heap, commonly referred to as the Colosseum's thigh, built half the churches of Renaissance Rome. In 1452, a single busy contractor carried off more than 2,500 cartloads of stone. After all these centuries of earthquakes and pillaging, it might seem surprising that anything is left of the Colosseum. The reason so much remains, remarkably, is that part of the building was protected. As mentioned earlier, the north side of the Colosseum was always less susceptible to earthquake damage. It was kept from being pulled apart by scavengers, however, by the popes. The Colosseum's north side happened to face the processional route connecting the Lateran Palace with the Vatican. The popes seem to have deliberately preserved this part of the Colosseum as a monumental backdrop for their parades. Not every pope was on board. As late as the 16th century, Pius V proposed pulling down what remained of the arena. But most pontiffs, fortunately, insisted on preserving this fragment of Rome's greatest ancient building. So there you have it. We have half a Colosseum because earthquakes and the popes spared it. If you'd like to learn more about the Colosseum, I now offer virtual guided tours exploring the building and the Roman games. Visit toldandstone.com to learn more. In the meantime, as always, thanks for watching.